Welcome to the Nanovation Podcast. Information about this and other episodes can be found at fillerlab.com/nanovation. If you like what you hear, be sure to tell a friend or leave a review on iTunes. It really does help. I welcome your thoughts and suggestions. You can contact me on Twitter at Michael Filler or via email at nanovationpodcast@gmail.com. This episode of Nanovation is made possible by the generous support of the Chi Foundation.
We were completely naive. I mean, naive is not even a strong enough word to describe where we started in this process because we thought better thermal conductivity, clearly they'll be knocking our door down.
That's Bara Cola, talking about his experience and that of most entrepreneurs starting a company. Bara founded Carbice to commercialize carbon nanotube-based solutions for cooling the electronics that are all around us. He and I discussed the value and challenge of maintaining business relationships, how competition from abroad is changing the playing field, and what new carbon nanotube-based products are now making their way to the market. Bara is an entrepreneur in every sense of the word. I hope you enjoy hearing his battlefield stories, both the good and the bad, and that they motivate you to do something great. This is the Nanovation Podcast, an exploration of big innovations emerging from small things. I'm Mike Filler, your host and a professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Enjoy the show.
They ask the darndest things. I've learned so much from my children over the past year.
My favorite one that Jackson's ever asked me, and actually I think I talked about it on the podcast months ago, was, how do we know dinosaurs were brown? Right?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and I think the answer is mostly that we don't.
We don't have skin fossils.
We've guessed based on colors of other reptiles and things and birds and whatever, and made a very educated guess.
What if they were yellow? Wouldn't that just blow our minds?
If they were coated with LEDs, it'd be fantastic. Which is, the study of dinosaurs is already awesome, and if they were LED coated, it would be even more awesome.
I'm going to imagine them from now on being yellow with blue LEDs as light, like eyes or something. Yeah,
and lasers.
Lasers, yes.
Lasers are important part of dinosaur lore. So you don't remember this probably, but you provided everyone with a fantastic breakfast recipe last time you were on the show.
I did. It was some odd salmon scramble with eggs.
That's right.
Yeah. I have not made it since.
Oh, you have not?
No,
so what have you been making?
You know what? I haven't really been good at making breakfast these days. I've been so busy. So a lot of cereal, toast with jam.
What kind of jam?
Strawberry. That's kind of my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jam, preserves, or jelly?
For me, it goes preserves, jams, then jelly. Jelly's always the last resort.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You can stay on the show.
I can stay on the show. I'm really into biscuits these days. I'll tell you this. So my sister visited for New Year's, and she so every holiday, my wife and I alternate which set of parents we go to for the Christmas or the Thanksgiving. And so I was not home with my family for Christmas, and my sister introduced her buttermilk biscuit recipe to the family. And they all said it was the best thing they had ever tasted. And so she came through and taught me this recipe, and they were correct. A lot of times they say things like that, and it's not exactly it. But this time, the best biscuit recipe ever, and it's so simple that I can make them. So the past 3 weekends, I have made biscuits every Sunday morning, and they're delicious.
So why haven't I been invited over for a Sunday morning breakfast?
Sunday is ahead of us.
Okay, good. I'll see you then. So that's actually a pretty impressive feat living in the Southeast, where biscuits are one of our specialties.
They are, and I'm a biscuit connoisseur.
Okay, so this goes way back.
Goes way back, yeah. I mean, these are so the thing about these biscuits, these are old school biscuits. These are how people made biscuits back in the day, right? They're not, like your Pillsbury biscuits. They're very dense. They're irregular. But they're
artisan. That's called artisan.
They're artisan. Okay, they're artisan. That's the new. They're artesian biscuits with jam, strawberry jam.
Right, not jelly, because then it would definitely not be artesian. So Bara Cola, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
I haven't checked in a while, but your episode is one of the most listened to episodes, probably in large part because it has been around the longest. And so when people are trying to discover the podcast, they hear my first episode with Charlie Bennett, and then they loved Charlie so much that they go on to you, and then they stop.
Yeah.
And then they don't listen to the show anymore. So
well, they shouldn't. I think that's, a good finish for a lot of things.
Bara, and then you're done. It's over. So I thought it would be great to have Bara back on the show, both because he's a friend and has fantastic recipes that he shares with people, but also he's been doing some really interesting things with a company he founded, which is called Carbice Nanotechnologies, right?
That's right.
So why don't you talk about that a bit?
So Carbice is, when was it that I was on your show last? Was this
almost a year ago?
Almost a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot has happened within that year. Carbice makes materials for getting heat out of electronic devices. I tell people we make the world's best thermal glue, and we do that with nanomaterials.
And why is that a problem? Why don't you get heat out of these things?
Well, because basically they just don't perform well. If you ever, just a practical example for regular folks, if you're trying to stream a movie off of Amazon and it freezes up, it's most likely because the computer chip inside of your TV box throttled back.
It's not Comcast? I want to blame Comcast all the time.
Well, Comcast, they have the hardware. So Comcast spec the hardware from companies
I see what you're saying.
Right? And so their hardware, that box that you pay a rental fee for that the government wants to change, that has at least 3 computer chips in it. And everybody you get near the TV, you feel this like you're standing next to a heater.
Yeah.
There's heat coming out of there. And all of those chips, every chip made today has a thermometer in it. And if it gets too hot, it just takes the power down. If the power goes down, then your download is going to be slower.
I see.
Right. So we're trying to help everybody get that download faster, be entertained. But more importantly, pretty much every type of electronic device, whether it's your autopilot in your Tesla, whether it's your solar system or your new green energy or old energy, there's going to be some sort of electrical conversion happening. All of these things produce heat as a waste byproduct.
And it's an inefficiency.
It's an inefficiency, and so we make a material that helps with that problem.
Okay.
Right? It's going to help connect those devices to big hunks of metal that help get the heat out a little bit better.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So then talk about. Can you talk a bit about how you do that?
Yeah, sure. So we do that with the world's best thermally conductive material. So I don't know, what year is it now? 2017. So. Yeah. 91, this material, the carbon nanotube, it's a material I talk a lot about, was really revealed to the world. And that material, if you take it at its elemental, state, has a thermal conductivity, the rate at which it can draw heat out of something, 8 times better than copper. Copper is kind of the common material. If you go to Williams-Sonoma and get a high-end pan, it's copper, right? So we take that material and we assemble it into carpets.
Wait a minute. Am I going to be able to get a carbon nanotube pan pretty soon?
I'm just taking notes, Mike.
Okay.
I'm going to write this down. Future product, note to self,
okay.
Carbon nanotube pan.
Call Williams-Sonoma.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And then we can bake my biscuits.
I'll see you Sunday.
See you Sunday.
Okay.
So basically, we our goal as a company is to really assemble what we feel is a very unique skill set of thermal expertise with materials synthesis and scaling, and an operational efficiency that is enabled by the IP of how we make the material. And so we combine those 3 things, and we're scaling up, if you will. If you basically could shrink yourself down and walk through our product, it would look like you were in a forest of giant trees. Vertical trees, standing straight up, where the tips of these trees scraping the sky, you can imagine if those trees were to be pressed into a hillside, that the leaves and the branches would really spread out and make a lot of contact.
I see.
That's what we're doing. We're taking carpet-like or vertical fiber structures that stand up, we're pressing them into surfaces, and we're making really good contact. And so it's a pretty simple process actually to make it. we don't.
So the contact
Sure.
piece is really important then. The fact that they can kind of mold around the object they're trying to contact. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
If you think about this, you think about a bath sponge. I don't know if people actually use sponges anymore, like traditional
nobody.
sponges, right?
Nobody.
They have these little, I don't even know what they call those things. They're kind of more fancy synthetic things that are fluffy.
Loofahs.
Loofahs, yeah, the loofahs, right? So think about an old school sponge, like a yellow old school sponge.
Right.
If you were to press your finger in the center of that sponge, you wouldn't just press the sponge down where your finger is. It would pull material in some radius around your finger down as well.
Yep.
I call it the trampolining effect.
Sure.
So that's a problem because if you have a surface that's irregular and you have a point that presses into it, it pushes more material away from other parts of the surface.
Right.
So the unique thing about our material is that with this conformality is it happens at two different length scales. It happens at the nanoscale and at the macro scale. And so at the nanoscale, when you have something that presses in, because each of these trees is free to fall independently in the forest, you can actually press into the structure without causing this trampolining effect. But then once you reach a certain threshold of contact, then the entire material can press the rest of the way down like a sponge. And so what we do and bring to the market that's unique is that nanoscale contact.
Okay.
Right. And so because of that, we've actually in applications with customers where they typically may use a pad that's a sponge-like gap pad, they call it, that has to be, let's say, 300 microns. You don't have to know the units if that's not familiar with you, if you prefer English units. We can replace that with something that is 5 times thinner, but meet the surface compliance requirements.
Okay.
Right. And so thinner is better because no matter how high or how good a thermal conductor something is, the thicker you make it, the more resistance you add from getting heat from one end to the other. So you always want to go thin. And the only reason anyone ever goes thick with these pads is to make that surface compliance. But Carbice now has a technology and a product that disrupts that, and that we have the world's thinnest compliant thermal contact material.
So this is exactly the opposite of what you have in insulation in your home, right? You can choose, like in your roof, to have 8 inches of insulation or 12 or 14 inches sprayed in there.
Absolutely.
Right. And thicker means more resistive, less heat flow. You want the exact opposite. You're trying to get heat out of these electronic devices.
We're trying to let it out. So we want to have the most inefficient house in the world, ideally, right?
Yeah, right.
But you don't want to put your computer chip in a warm box. And people may have experienced this if you I don't know, if you have your cell phone in your pocket for a long period of time and you accidentally butt dial someone, or you have a software running and you start feeling things heat up in your pocket, that's a problem. But if your pocket had if you had a carbon nanotube pocket, think about that for a moment. Whew.
So that it wouldn't be hot?
It
would just transfer the heat right to my leg.
It would chance. Well, that may be good either. So ideally, carbon nanotube pocket with insulation between skin and pocket.
Keep taking notes.
Yes.
Okay.
But you want to get it out. So you got the point. I mean, is that's what we do fundamentally, and frankly, all of that is enabled by this new material, the carbon nanotube, and what we tell customers. Right. I've transitioned, as you know, Mike, from being full-time faculty member to now being a CEO of a company, and it's a high-tech company. So I spend a lot of time with my technical team, getting into the weeds, leading from that angle. But I do a lot of selling also, which I have to. You have to, no matter what, no matter how disruptive, and our tagline is that we make materials for removing heat from electronics 10 to 30 times better than anything else, and we believe that. But it's not always that better than anything else is not always about just getting the heat out. Part of the equation for better is easier to apply, better mechanics, better cost, ROI, return on investment. All these things add up because at the end of the day, customers always have an option. No matter how limited you may think they are, or they will always find a solution. So your job is to help them see the value specifically to your solution. It would always be a choice. And so we do that, and part of the pitch is that because of nanotechnology, because specifically of the carbon nanotube structure we make and how you grow it, we have what may be the world's most tunable thermal pad, because we can, decorate it with X material, Y material. We can, stack them. We have IP where you can stack these and interdigitate the carpet fibers. And you can't do that with typical gap pads.
Okay.
Right. And so that's just another bit. And I think that that's something that, speaking broadly for a moment, that will be and is unique about most nanotechnologies compared to traditional materials, because you get that extra knob to turn at the small scale that gives you an ability to make something more tunable and more importantly, make something more tunable in a reproducible and fast or efficiently scaled way.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying. And I agree with the value of the nano piece for sure. I was hoping you could talk a bit about how you entered this market, right? How you kind of touched on it, about convincing somebody that this is not just better, it's better along multiple axes. And that some betterness, if you will, is why someone will go with you. But talk about the challenges of breaking into a new market that is entrenched in these kinds of pads you were talking about, and convincing people that, you need to you need to look at these carbon nanotubes and you need to look at our carbon nanotubes.
Very good question. I mean, we were completely naive. I mean, naive is not even a strong enough word to describe where we started in this process, because we thought better thermal conductivity, clearly they'll be knocking our door down.
Yeah.
But, now this nuanced way that I position ourselves, or position us, it comes from learning from the customer. It comes from failure. I mean, Carbice was founded in 2012. It's 2017. We went through one government grant. We're just now, last year got our first angel investment, in the process of closing a seed round with local VCs. That's a lot of time and a lot of learning, but it's absolutely necessary, because, we showed up at the door to customers that were friends, specifically to your question. I worked at Intel. I was in the part of the company that focused on packaging and testing chips. So I got to see their process and I understood the problem. And then when I go back and I from a different angle, and I'm, as a vendor or a potential supplier, giving them a material, what you find is that everybody's learning together. Right? You bring a new technology, new material, the customer is not going to be able to help you install that in the best possible way, because they're going to learn along with you. And so we learned, we sent stuff, it failed on one dimension or in one axis. We fixed that. We tested it again, it failed in a different dimension. And we just went through this process over and over again, and we were patient enough to keep listening and keep iterating. And I'll be honest that it's a brutal process. Along that way, people that we worked with changed jobs. Mm-hmm. We lost connections. We had to reestablish relationships. Sometimes it took 2 years to reestablish a relationship that we had invested so much in. But the way you have to look at it is it's really a matter of appreciating that any opportunity you have to learn from anybody is going to be valuable, and coming up with a strategy to move forward despite setbacks to other people, right? And I give a very specific example. We started working with my former employer, and we worked with them for 2 years on this product for the process of testing chips, where our contact material would be on the test head of this tester that had a heat sink, and it would basically slam into the chip, test it, come up, and the new chip will come in. And we learned a lot. And just when we were ready to iterate to what we thought was going to be a winning solution, I get a call, and my friend there says, "Hey, I'm switching to a different division. It's in a different state. Sorry about that." But we're human. We put our head in the sand for a little bit, but we took what we learned and we just started to shop that around, even though it wasn't ready, and even though we knew that we would have to learn new things about the next application for the next person. And that's what the process. I mean, I can go on and on. I don't want to belabor it, but the process is really just a process of understanding that this is a long process. I mean, I think you will get frustrated and people will drop out of this process if you think it's going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't happen like that.
It's like anything, right? Anything hard takes time. Whether hard for you is getting your bachelor's degree, whether hard for you is getting a PhD, starting a company, whatever, having a family, right? It takes time, and recognizing it's hard though. It's hard to recognize up front just how long it takes to build relationships and rebuild things.
One of my favorite quotes is, "Every overnight success takes 10 years."
I use Apple a lot as an example. I mean, people look at Apple as often are coming up with these really innovative, interesting products. And actually, I think what they actually do is very good incremental work. They come up with a product, and then they spend a lot of time iterating, making it better year by year. They stay at it until they've accumulated enough new things that they can take a leap. I think evolution works that way. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the iteration is absolutely essential, no matter what the National Science Foundation says they want in grants, where they want transformative, game-changing ideas. I get it. I know why they say that. But in the end, being able to do enough incremental work to get from one stone to the next is really important.
Absolutely, Mike. And I would be remiss to not mention, probably in this process of patience and recognizing how long it takes, maybe one of the most important thing, especially being the founder and CEO, is to be able to articulate a vision to your team and recruit the right type of people on your team that can balance that excitement that you and I share when we do fundamental research, that, believing in SF, that, we are working towards transformative, right?
I keep telling myself that.
It's transformative, right? But at the same time, you got to balance that with taking small victories along the way. And I've been completely more fortunate than I could have ever imagined to have the right people around me and to build the right team that understands that process and that has that character, that personality. And it's going to be interesting because, like I mentioned, we are closing the largest amount of private investment that we've closed to this point, and we're going to hire more people. And so now I'm thinking a lot about the culture and making sure I hire the right people. Like, what's their temperament? Are they patient? But do they balance patience with, impatience? And then you got to put these people in the right roles of the business. Right? And so these are all interesting things that I'm sure every person that has gone through a process of starting something new or building something has had, similar feelings. But I think sometimes we get enamored with nanovation or nanotechnology, and we think it's so amazing that it's going to do something that allows us to break the mode of how every business or new thing is developed, which is long and hard process. Right.
Speaking of that, actually, question for you. Because I'll be honest, I look at carbon nanotubes and I say it's just carbon. Now, I know it's sp2 arranged, and depending on how you roll it up, it has really impressive properties in many respects. But my question, I want to throw that out there. But my real question...
I mean, the listeners didn't see my body reaction to him calling it just carbon. I recoiled back to the door in disbelief.
But I'm curious, those two parts of this. One is, what led to the carbon nanotube in some sense? What was the incremental work that allowed the carbon nanotube to happen? And then what has the incremental work on the carbon nanotube allowed to happen? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I probably should have just thrown this on you without telling you beforehand.
So it was maybe, and I may have the dates wrong, but maybe it was the late 19th century that we invented a process for synthetic graphite production, right? Your number 2 pencil, right? Allowed you to score that high score on your ACT. Maybe. Shh. Okay. Our little secret.
Yeah.
Mike. All right. But to me, that was kind of an incremental process on natural graphite. We learned a lot about carbon and natural graphite. We learned a lot about coal, and people just really wanted to find better ways to make efficient use of resources that they had, right? And they kept pushing this along. And so enter the 20th century, where we start understanding more about atomic physics and getting even deeper into a quantitative understanding of chemistry, enabled people to start making predictions of what type of chemical structures would be ideal or might be found, right?
And I guess also the interrogation techniques to go look for them.
And interrogation techniques to look for them and to, have some validation of what you think what the theory is predicting.
Right.
And so that moved along for some time. And I mean, really before even the carbon nanotube came on the scene in 1991 is this world famous material. the reason that it could come on the scene like that is because there was so much groundwork before it, where people were finding small-scale carbon filaments. People were predicting tremendous properties for carbon structures that would look like a carbon nanotube. And then
so that was going on before.
It was going on before. So I mean, really, I would say that probably before the carbon nanotube really came on the scene, there was probably almost 100 years of incremental work in carbon. Right, moving towards making synthetic diamond. I mean, my advisor when I was an undergrad at Vanderbilt, he got his start by synthesizing diamond films for thermal dissipation. And the only reason that he ended up becoming one of the first people to work on carbon nanotubes for thermal is because you could use the exact same system. You just had to tweak the recipe a little bit. Right. Completely incremental, right? It's opportunistic, right? That's how incremental work happens a lot of times is people are doing something and then they see an opportunity and they don't have the resources to get, completely recapitalized with new assets. So they just use the assets that they have and they got to move forward. Right. And so to the second part of your question, I mean, so there was in my opinion, many years of incremental work leading up to the carbon nanotube. And I think in hindsight, people have started to try to give credit to more than just one person for the carbon nanotube because of that. And even, I mean, we found carbon nanotubes, and I might have mentioned this on the last podcast, in Damascus steel. I mean,
You did.
Right? So humans have been making carbon nanotubes maybe since we've been making materials.
Right. And I know I've heard about them in effluent of power plants, right? They're formed during combustion frequently. And so they've been around for a long time.
Since then, I mean, a lot of the first decade of really being excited about clearly understanding what a carbon nanotube looks like, working more towards making them in a controlled way, was a lot about science. I mean, and I don't want to call it incremental science, but it was science that built on top of prior knowledge. And in a lot of ways, no matter how much we tell ourselves that, we publish a paper in Science or Nature and it's groundbreaking, and it is, because it's important when you see a body of work build up to an increase in our understanding that is more than the traditional incremental. But in the view of the world, it's all incremental.
It's right. Zoom out far enough. Everything
zoom out far enough. It's all incremental, right?
That's right.
So that's progressed for many years, and there are a lot of exciting things that have been building up. And we had a first, maybe a 1 and a 1.5 wave of carbon nanotube commercialization, where you build up so much excitement in the community that you have to let that out through commercialization efforts, even if it's ready or not.
Yeah, right.
Or everything will blow up.
Yeah, a lot of examples of that. It blows up anyway.
It's going to blow up anyway, but it's better that it doesn't just blow up inside the university, so that you can have some sort of foundation where you can keep retooling. I don't know.
Well, I guess maybe other people would disagree. You still never know what you don't know. You don't know when it's ready, so you have to try and give it a shot.
You got to try and give it a shot, and it's fair. And you go out, you learn, and some things are successful, some things aren't, and that's part of the incremental commercialization process. Is that it's collective to some degree, because those that win in the end were the ones that were smart enough to learn from everyone else's failures. Right. Which therefore all winners are incremental, because you're not winning unless you built off of something else that you learned from and you modified. And in this commercial space, and I've learned it intimately over the past few years, you don't have as much room for mistakes as you do as a researcher. I mean, you're kind of paid as a researcher to make mistakes. Right. Right. You get out and put the CEO hat on. You got to make payroll. Right. And mistakes can lose you friends and family.
Hit metrics and cost targets.
And cost targets. So that's the thing, is that and I shared some articles with you earlier this week. I'm very excited about carbon nanotube science, but I'm even more excited when I see very real signs of the commercialization of carbon nanotubes. And we've moved from a time where, for 10 years now, we've been mixing carbon nanotubes in batteries. We've been mixing carbon nanotubes in composites. Right. Concrete. But now we're starting to see things like a company, Nantero, carbon nanotube memory. I mean, this is huge news coming out of last year that this is coming.
So that one in particular, and I'll put the 3 links that Bara sent me in the show notes. But Nantero, talk about why that's so good and so interesting, what they're doing with memory, CNT-based memory.
Well, the CNTs just allow you to scale technology to smaller scales. And what that means is you can pack more in a box, right? And everybody likes to get more for less, or more in less space, right?
I don't, actually.
Well,
not at all.
maybe,
I do. I'm sorry, take that back. I do.
Well, I mean, fair enough. Maybe you do, maybe you don't sometimes.
Right.
But I think when it comes for things that you pay for and you want to get function out of, if you can get all your function in a smaller space and you can pack it in and it's cheaper, all of these are good things. And the carbon nanotube, because of its superior electrical properties, it has efficiencies that allow us to have better memory. So the memory's fast. You can, and so when you think about fast memory, what does that mean? Well, if we want to talk about computers operating like the brain, they need to get faster.
Do they? I thought the brain operates pretty slowly.
Well, frankly, I don't know how the brain operates. And I'll be honest, I don't think a lot of people still really know how it operates. I think we have brain models. So I'll kind of talk within that framework.
Okay.
Maybe someone will correct me. But I think that at the end of the day, one of the limitations in moving towards a world where we have useful AI is being able to store and retrieve information at even faster and faster speeds and at higher and higher packing densities. And this is where the Nantero, where I see that kind of fitting in.
This, I forget what it's called. I'll go dig it up. But it's a consortium. I think Micron is at the center of it, where they're making like this, basically a memory technology that is able to read-write so quickly that it kind of blurs the line between hard drives and RAM. Mm. Right, that it's so quick, everything is easily accessible at all times.
Yeah.
That you don't have to store stuff for quick access in RAM and then go to the hard drive when you need it. I forget what it's called, but I'll put a link in the show notes. But it sounds kind of like this is similar.
It's similar, yeah. I mean, but I think what it makes it so game changing is it's a platform shift that's so disruptive that it gives us a different roadmap to get better and better and better and better. Right. And I don't know, when you were talking just now, I was thinking, because it's kind of funny and ironic. We're talking about computers getting better and better memory, and as we get older, our memory gets worse and worse. Mm-hmm. And it kind of made me depressed in the moment thinking about that. That's an aside, but okay. I'll regain focus.
That's good. The asides are good. So I want to switch back over to commercialization, and I want you to talk about, or I'd like you to talk about the challenges you face working in a global market and having competitors from all over the globe, and what that means for your strategy, and what works well by being based here in the U.S. and what you see not working so well in that regard.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to say nanotubes first. I don't know. I was going to make a play on America first, but
try and keep the show as apolitical as possible. But that may not be possible for too much longer.
Yeah. It's a good question, Mike. There are a lot of global pressures. I think that there are big players globally that recognize the potential of nanotechnology. The way these things tend to happen, I mean, if you take the solar industry, for example, I think the forensic results are pretty clear on when countries make big investments in capital infrastructure and drop costs tremendously. You can argue whether in fair or it's just different political and economic systems.
Right.
It can cause the industry to completely shift to that region.
Sure.
And I think that those are the real pressures for us.
So you're talking, let's be specific here for the solar cell example. You're talking about what a lot of people in the U.S. would say was China dumping solar cells onto the market at below cost prices, or at least very low cost prices. I mean, the term that I've heard is this dumping term. And what I hear you saying is, well, they just made the investments in the infrastructure to drive the cost down to a point where we couldn't compete in the U.S.
Yeah, and they ate the loss also, right, for a long time.
Right.
They had the capital.
So they did eat the loss.
Yeah, people would do that. And so we see the same thing happening, frankly, in the nano space. I see so many, there are a lot of, we're not the only ones making carbon nanotubes. There are a lot of people around the world. I've traveled to Korea, to other places, and we are pretty good at what we do, especially with making vertically aligned carbon nanotubes. And frankly, there aren't many people that are doing that. And a lot of people that started several years ago doing that have moved away from it because they couldn't scale it at a reasonable cost. We've solved a lot of those problems. And in that process, I kind of understand fundamentals of what the cost is. Mm-hmm. Yet you see people out there who are positioning their materials at these cost points that are not realistic. Uh-huh. And you wonder how they maintain that. And so that's a real pressure. And some of those folks are just blowing smoke, frankly, and they won't last. But then some of those folks that with deep pockets and an eye to make a strategic investment for the long run create a lot of pressure. We are concerned with that as a company. Our strategy is to be very open and transparent with our customers about what we see as global trends and to help them see what potential strategy works for their interests. But at the same time, we are becoming more protective of what we do as well, so that even in a fiercely competitive global economy, we can hold on to our core IP and provide our value to customers that are open in the best way that we can. Those are just important things to think about, and these are just the realities of a world where there's global competition in a space like nanomaterials or heat dissipation. That's not the most sexiest heat dissipation, at least, to the CTOs and the managers of the businesses, where you have to climb up. You got to get in with a technical guy, technical person. You got to climb up, gain their trust. They have to sell your product to someone higher. Yeah. Then you got to make relationships. It takes time, right?
Let's talk about the manufacturing just a little bit, not the specific technology per se, but I'm curious. Do you have a sense for what the area is of thermal interface materials used per year?
We take a bottom-up approach to the market. So in all the markets that we're going after, I know exactly what that number is.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us like a ballpark order of magnitude?
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at the home gateway market, for example, which is TV boxes, your Siri, your Alexa, all these things going into your house that have Wi-Fi and want to control things. Even today, that market is putting out billions of square inches.
Billions of square inches.
Yeah, maybe if I had to throw a number out, I would say 3 billion square inches a year.
Per year.
I
have to do that conversion. I know that we produce about 3 miles squared per year of electronic devices. Total. Those are all the wafer starts, I think, globally. But I don't know I'm not good at converting inches to miles.
Yeah, I'm talking about area. I never think in miles because I always think in equipment size.
Right.
So
I think Google can help us with this, right?
So you said, Google, can you help?
Let's see what's happened.
All right.
1 billion, real-time follow-up. I'm going to try and do math. 1 billion, you said
square inches.
Square inches to square miles. Let's see what Google says. They say that's a quarter of a square mile. So that sounds about right, actually.
Yeah.
To me. Okay.
So quarter of a square mile, right? And so every one of those you said 3 square miles?
Yeah, is total electronic devices produced.
Every one of those has some sort of thermal solution. I'll just put it like that.
Yeah.
Either they have a direct TIM or thermal interface material contact, or they have a PCB, a board that helps dissipate heat. They all have something that's helping with that process. And even at the low power ones don't necessarily need it, but usually they're accompanied by something else that requires them to need it as well. Right. So it's a lot. It's a huge, and so to your point about scale, there's no way today that we can serve that market.
Sure.
So you have to start out with small markets. We start out with a market that maybe only has 10 million square inches a year, right? So we could build a facility, which we have today. We're setting up a facility in the 1,000 square feet of space.
Can I come see it?
You can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see it.
Okay.
You want to see it?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Sunday.
Biscuits.
And Carbice. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. That's in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, it's actually right next door to where we are. So it's here in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the capital of Carbice. We'll build it here. We can scale up. What you have to do, what we've done, is stay flexible, right? So we build a facility, we operationalize it, we've over the past year since we've talked, we've scaled our production capacity 25x.
Whoa.
That's a huge accomplishment, right? That's a value inflection, which is why we're getting investment now, right? You go to the next milestone. The next milestone will be when we get a big order from one of these companies that has volumes that we can't serve.
Right.
Then this is when we go and move into a bigger production facility. But we've kind of built a copy exact environment, probably from Intel rubbing off on me for my days there, where we can easily, for us, 6 to 9 months, we can get to whatever scale we need to, according to the supply chain that we've set up.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, copy exactly is an Intel term that when Intel builds a new fab, and these are nowadays $10 billion investments, they generally try and take everything that was done on a previous fab, and particularly when they're making an exact copy of it. So actually, I was an intern at Intel as well when I was a student up in Portland, Oregon. They were building a new fab in Phoenix, Arizona, or outside of Phoenix, and it was going to be the exact same as the fab I was at. And they literally copied exactly, like all the toilets were in the exact same spot. Because, you start to make changes and you don't think it affects something until it affects something.
Yeah.
And the making of a computer chip is way more complicated than most people recognize. And even there's all sorts of unknowns that Intel doesn't recognize that go into the process when it works. So that's why they do that copy exactly thing. I was going to ask you about,
if you have to walk 2 more feet to the bathroom, that could fatigue you a little bit if you're working on the
and
line.
you don't realize, right, exactly,
that
you might drop some wafers or
that's
something.
That's right. Yeah.
No one holds wafers anymore.
Yeah.
Back in the day when people used to carry boxes of wafers from step to step, they used to have something called the $1 Million Club. You ever heard of the $1 Million Club?
No.
This is back when chips weren't, well, actually when chips were expensive, right? A state-of-the-art microprocessor was like a $500, $600, $700 investment. And they would have 25 wafers in a box, and on each wafer they'd say there's 200 chips. So you do the math. Mm-hmm. You drop one of those boxes halfway through processing, drop kick it by accident, and all the wafers shatter because they're just made out of silicon. You're part of the $1 Million Club.
Welcome to the club, yeah.
So I was going to ask you, when you think about scaling, though, it sounds like the way you talk about it that you don't really anticipate any fundamental challenges in going from the current scale to a larger scale, and that the physics of processing is mostly going to be the same as you scale up.
There will be challenges, but not fundamental.
Okay.
And that's really what you, in my opinion, you need to do with nanotechnology and materials is seed in the DNA of your technology a fundamentally scalable approach.
Yeah.
That's what we did. And so for us now, it's just an engineering challenge to keep getting bigger and bigger at lower and lower cost.
Yeah, and I don't think that is done regularly.
It's not done.
I think
regularly.
some people fall into it by accident.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people mistake what it means to scale, and they just say, well, that's just engineering all the time, when they don't really recognize how things change as you go to larger manufacturing scale. I think I see a lot of that. I don't know what you see. Do you, as people try and take more out of the lab, maybe beyond carbon nanotubes, I mean, have you seen examples where people have tried to just take what happened in the lab and say, I'm going to scale it up without recognizing those challenges?
That's how most of it happens.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate, but in order for it to happen the other way, Mike, you have to have 2 things. One, you have to have the vision for something big on a long-term scale. And then the second thing is that you have to have the right, you have to be properly positioned and resourced in where you are and what you're doing in your life to have the freedom to do that. Because a lot of times, the reason that doesn't happen most of the times is that when things are invented, there's a pressure of time and resources that causes people to work to produce a result that may not have been the most thoughtful result that they wanted. So if you have the space to think, if you have the vision that caused you to think a certain way during that space, and then you have the resource and the time to work on it, that's why we share this belief that the university offers a very special environment for scalable nano manufacturing to be seeded in the proper way, right? Because fundamentally, that's how research universities and faculty are structured, to be able to have some space and some time and some resources to build that out. Right? Yeah. But even in that space, as you know, there's pressure to publish things quickly, pressure to produce results to get money. So you got to have to find the right type of funding.
Yeah.
To work on that. And people are doing this in the energy space. There are a lot of funds popping up that want to give researchers freedom to work on clean energy solutions over a long period of time without reporting and all this stuff. Maybe we need something like that around nano manufacturing if we can provide a strong enough end-use motivation and really, through data show people that that's actually a key barrier for us being competitive on a global scale.
So for those who are interested in that specific topic, right, the National Nanotechnology Initiative, which is out of OSTP, which I'm not sure still exists, but I'm hopeful it does, which is part of the White House. They have had this initiative since 2001. $24 billion has been invested broadly in all types of nanotech, and that definition is very broad. But they had a triennial review report that came out in 2016, and I'll put the link in the show notes. And one of the bolded recommendations is in this nanomanufacturing space. And you read the report, though, and you see how many times people have said it needs to be done and then erased it. We don't have enough resources to do that. And then they put it back in. No, someone else will take care of it. And my feeling with this is we're at a point now where either we're going to make the investment and you're going to start to see more stuff than just carbon nanotubes come out of the lab, or we're not going to see stuff come out of the lab. Mm-hmm. Or at least we'll see it at a much longer time scale if we're not going to grapple with processing at scale in a real serious way.
Yeah.
I have one more question for you, and then I have to go, and you have work to do too. And that is, I'm curious, what are the kinds of things that are happening for carbon nanotubes that are unexpected based on their properties? Right? You gave these thermal transport applications, and those are clearly because carbon is lightweight and forms strong bonds with other carbon atoms, and that gives it good thermal transport properties. I think of something like silicon, which is not the greatest semiconductor, it's not the greatest transporter of charge. Let's say it's good enough. But to be honest, silicon in the solar space was completely fluky. It was happened because it was already in the electronic space. But silicon is a horrendous light absorber, right? But it ended up working out. Are there things that are emerging with carbon nanotubes that are emerging irrespective of what the key benefits of carbon nanotubes are, or as knock-on effects of the growth of the kinds of things that Carbice works on?
I mean, so it's a very, very good question. You're making me think hard, Mike, on this final question.
We can postpone till Sunday if you like.
And I'm out of coffee.
Sorry.
So I mean, basically, if you want to have the ideal application of the nanotubes properties, it's going to be things like electrical wires, thermal conductors.
Right.
It has light absorbing properties and things like that are special. So really, we kind of started with applications that weren't really ideal, mixing them in concrete or composites.
But they're mechanically strong too. So
but I guess, so maybe they're mechanically strong. So maybe that is tapping into that. So things that aren't, so CO2 absorption.
There you go. Okay.
You know what? This is something that people are doing that's real. They're mixing it in paint so that it can be fantastic volumetric storage of CO2.
High surface area, basically.
High surface area. And I'm going to tell you a story. This is a really good story. When I was a grad student, and this was probably 2007 or 2006, I taught in the Duke TIP program one summer a course on nanotechnology to ninth graders. And as a part of that, in addition to having the students use a tabletop scanning electron microscope in class, we had a project where the students had to come up with a product proposal based on carbon nanotubes. And in that moment, one of those ninth graders came up with the idea of mixing carbon nanotubes in paint to absorb CO2 during fires. And lo and behold, there are people selling that product today. I'm sure it's not the student. I don't know where that student went.
I was going to say, where is that student? Go find them now.
Yeah, go find them now. Too bad I don't think he patented the idea.
I will hire them.
But he was amazing. And I when he, out of all, most of the ideas were good efforts. I'll say it like that.
Actually, that person would be going to grad school right now. We need to find them.
Hopefully he's somewhere doing something amazing.
Okay.
But when he presented his, I think the class noticed kind of a palpable shift in my body language. Like said, that's a good idea.
Okay.
I think we could write a PhD dissertation studying that one.
Right.
So,
kids say the darndest things for sure.
The kids say the darndest things. So that one of the wild ones that people are, they're mixing graphene and carbon nanotubes in paint, using it, positioning it in the market as something that helps with fires and things like that.
But I think this is important, right? There's these. I find that there's these knock-on effects when something is manufactured at scale. All the learning.
Yeah.
And people forget that. And that's why, in my opinion, we need more investment in the processing stuff, because just having good, pure materials that you can work with allow you to explore all these spaces that you wouldn't necessarily explore and find all these other applications that aren't obvious from the science, let's say. But if we're not going to invest in being able to produce materials pure enough and cheap enough just even to share around the block, so to speak, then we're really limiting ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, in this company that's doing this, they actually have a weird. Well, it's not weird, but it's an interesting way to structure a small company. They structured a holding company that has like 7 or 8 different companies in it that they structured for certain markets. So they have one structured towards paint. They have one structured towards batteries. They have one structured towards this. And one of them that's also kind of weird is dental implants. They have one structure, and it's a graphene company, so they're putting graphene dental implants.
Well, see, that is if you that's the closest thing to bionic I've heard about in a while.
Yeah,
that is quite the party trick too, right?
Yeah.
So, okay,
All right.
Bara Cola, thank you so much, and I hope to see you again soon.
It's been a pleasure, Mike, as always, and we'll catch you next time.
I'll see you Sunday.
See you Sunday, biscuits.
You've been listening to Nanovation. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating or write a review on iTunes. It really does help. Show notes for this episode are available at fillerlab.com/nanovation. Nanovation is recorded on the campus of Georgia Tech. Thanks again to the Chi Foundation for their generous support. I'm Mike Filler. See you next time.